This video is not sponsored and has no adverts. Hello and thanks for joining me for some landscape photography. Well, it's that time of the year when people tend to look back over the previous 12 months and put out a video of their highlights. I haven't got many because I stopped vlogging halfway through the year and took quite a long period of time off to rethink things. However, I was going to share my top 3 images at the end of my last video. And I couldn't pick. I've ended up with 20 odd. So I'm going to share all 20 images and I'm going to explain to you why they are my personal photographic highlights of this year. They're not all necessarily technically brilliant. They're not all necessarily epic photos by any stretch of the imagination. But they're my personal highlights, whether it's locations, circumstances, and in some cases, they're a decent image. So I'm going to talk you through why I've picked them. So I'm not just going to play them all with a music track underneath them. So at least you get some insights into the questionable workings of my mind. Before I do that, I've got something I need to say. You know that these videos that I'm putting out these days don't have any YouTube adverts. And in fact, I've switched off advertising across my entire back catalogue. So that's, with this one included, 183 videos with no adverts. Now, as a result of that, YouTube's algorithm no longer promotes my stuff to new audiences. They won't push any videos that don't make them any money, and that's fair enough, I guess. So I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind at all helping me out with this. And frankly, I'm going to bribe you. What I think I'll do is give away to 3 subscribers, so you'll need to be subscribed, one of my prints. And you can pick any of my images, either from this video or any previous video, or go to my website where I've got my main portfolio on the homepage. I've got loads of supporting images on my blog posts and also on my location guides. So you can pick anything you want, leave a comment below saying which one you'd like, and then either next video or the video after, I'll do one of those random draw things. I'm not going to pick out my mates or anything like that. It will be random. And I will send you a print, kind of A3 size. Then I'm going to send you a postcard. It's going to be a decent size and it'll be mounted and ready to frame. So that's what I'm going to do in addition to advert-free entertainment. The bribery bit is I'm going to ask you to use the share button below on this video where you can share a link onto your social media to your audience. Doesn't have to be to this video, to be fair. It can be to any of my other ones that you might have enjoyed. But essentially, it'll kind of get the word out a little bit and make up for the fact that YouTube don't want to know. Right, okay, that's the housekeeping out the way. Hopefully 3 of you will get prints that you like, and I'll get a few new viewers. Right, let's get on with the images. This first image is from back in January, and it was a rare occasion when I only had my iPhone with me. And when the sky lit up at sunrise as I was walking the dog, I really wanted to find a way to record it other than just a picture of the sky. Now, the route we take skirts along several fields on our way to the beach, and luckily in one of them there were some beef cattle who made a perfect series of silhouettes, and I quite surprised myself with how much I like this image. Image number 2 is from March. This is our view from the dinner table, and I could see the sun going down into the haze that was being thrown up by the 3 tractors working the fields to prepare the summer crops. As the sun dropped, it got hazier and hazier, and the lake started to take on the colour. So I wolfed down the rest of my fish cake, apologised to the lovely Mrs. G, and hurtled out onto the front lawn just in time to capture this. Now, I had no time to set up a tripod shot, so I took a liberty with the ISO in order to keep my shutter speed fast enough to avoid any shake. Another reason I really like this is that I rarely use this composition because the farm buildings are ugly and distracting. But I think they really work well in this context as silhouettes. Image number 3, and this one's from March again. Now, I freely admit that many of my favourite photographs are captured whilst out walking the dog locally. and this is no exception. And it was the shapes of the sand on the beach which attracted me to this composition, because very often the midground really isn't very interesting at all when the tide is out. Number 4, also from March, and you've probably seen this before, as it's one of my favourite locations in the northern Snowdonia Mountains. And it's looking across towards Snowdon from Llyn-y-Dywarchen. I always like this composition of the stone wall snaking up towards what appears to be a lone tree, although it's actually 2 trees just carefully aligned for photography purposes. I always find when I come to this valley that whatever the conditions are, you can either head up towards Snowdon or in the other direction up towards the Nantler Ridge. There are a couple of lakes and quarries and all manner of interesting things to photograph within easy reach. So I like that it has options from a single car park, and as it happens, this is where I tend to bring tuition clients so we can make the most of whatever happens to be going on with the light and conditions. Number 5 is from March and from the same location and shoot as the last image. And I've picked it because it really illustrates the commonest conditions that we experience in the mountains throughout the year. It's so often characterised by dramatic clouds with shafts of light breaking through for mere seconds, and you have to react quickly to make the best of it. I've always really liked the way that the line of conifers forms a more interesting middle ground and layers nicely with Snowdon and Arran. Image number 6, also March. March was a bump month by the looks of it. For some reason, I've always fascinated by shots of the summit of Snowdon where there are just 1 or 2 figures present. It usually only happens really early in the morning, and I often find myself attempting a long-range shot from a nearby peak or valley. When conditions are like this, it really makes for an engaging black and white, and it's something I don't do very often. When I was looking back over my images, this one caught my eye for those reasons. Not necessarily photographic quality, but I enjoyed making this image. Image number 7, and it's April, and another dog walking handheld. At 150mm, and even with a fabulous Olympus stabilisation, I was nervous of camera shake, so hence the ISO getting nudged up to give me a super fast shutter speed. But by then they'd slightly gone further to the right than I would have liked. It would have been a better shot if they were over on the left of the image flying in that direction, but you can't have everything. I'm still quite pleased with the image. Number 8, again in April, Easter Saturday on the northern end of the Glidderau Ridge, looking southeast towards the Glidders themselves. There's something of a trend forming in these images, and that it's yet another handheld, although there was plenty of light this time and no need to lift the ISO. I've selected this one because I was just sitting on a rock having a pit stop and looking at this view with the fabulous shapes and shadows of Foel Goch and Agarn behind it, and the hints of light on the flank of the Glidders in the misty background was just something I wanted to remember while drinking my coffee. Image number 9, also April, another great dog walking sunrise across the dunes at Aberfrau. I really like the illuminated cirrus in the negative space in the top half of this one, and it hasn't been cropped at all. This is how I composed it. Number 10, shot in May, a couple of weeks after the last image, and the weather was back to normal for this part of the world, but it gave me the opportunity to shoot on the beach. Now that's something that I don't do very often, as there's usually very little of interest, but this squall hurtling up the Irish Sea was begging to be photographed, especially as there was just a hint of sunlight coming in over my left shoulder that was really illuminating the surf. It's usually quite difficult to capture the atmosphere of this location when there isn't really anything to rest your eye on, but I was quite pleased with this one because it really does convey the overall drama of the scene, and it's something which I experience all too frequently when I'm walking the dog there. Number 11, this one's from June, and the image is taken on the path up to Crimpiau, looking across to the northeast ridge of Moel Shabod. I was very struck with the way the mountain was playing hide and seek as the clouds blew through at a rate of knots, and the light was splashing in and out of the frame. And I had to wait a while to get a composition where there was no light on the foreground, because I wanted to pull you through to the mountain just using the foreground as a framing device. In this particular shot, the texture in the clouds worked really well at the same time, so this is why it's one of the favourites from this year. You might be wondering why I've been so cavalier with the ISO on this one in order to get such a high shutter speed. It's not as if I'm shooting sports or nature or anything like that. But I was out with a client and I just wanted to demonstrate that there's no need to be particularly scared of making use of camera settings to achieve what you're looking for, despite people telling you shouldn't. I've always felt it's a bit pointless having lenses that'll stop down to f/22 and an ISO that'll ramp up to 6400 and above, and photographers never go near those settings. The obsession with image quality really does bother me a bit. You should always make use of your equipment's capabilities when you need to, otherwise what's the point of them? Image number 12, also from June. This is from another tuition session with a client. I should just say that when I'm out with a client, I never take my own images. I carry a camera so I can demonstrate things, such as in this case where I was demonstrating composition. But I got home and had a look at the raw file and I thought, actually, that's worth processing. I don't do a great deal of woodland photography, and this made my top 20 because I quite like it. Although I suspect I'd probably be less interested if there weren't any rocks in it. Number 13, August. A view across Nant Peris from the lower levels of the Dinorwig slate quarry. And no prizes for guessing why this one makes my top 20. As I mentioned with one of the earlier images, these mounting conditions are really representative of how atmospheric it can be round here, and the diagonals in the rock strata add a good deal of interest to the image. So for me, it's almost a perfect combination. I really do like this image. Number 14, also from August, this derelict cottage at Dinorwig Slate Quarry perfectly represents the inspiration for my current RPS project. In fact, there's every chance this will make the final submission. I really like the variety of the vegetation, with the mountain ash covered in berries and the clump of heather in the foreground in full bloom, and that bracken lurking in the shadows to the right of the property. And I really like the backdrop with the birch and oak. It really sums up how nature reclaims its property when we finish with it. Moving on, number 15 in September. When you crawl out your tent at first light and one of your favourite mountains has a cloud formation, which, let's be fair, if it was painted, people would claim it's a bit far-fetched. You just have to take a photograph of it. This mountain is at the northeastern end of the Nantler Ridge, sometimes confused with one of the same name in the Glideri range because it's also called Agarn. I love the shape of this mountain, and I got loads of images from various angles because it looks really good, both from the valley floor with its almost sheer drop in that rock face that's facing us in this image, and from this angle, a sort of classic pointy mountain summit. I deliberately chose to hide the right-hand flank of the mountain using the outcrop of rock as a foreground because I wanted to try and build some layers into the image and balance those clouds over on the top left. But there's a gentle breeze blowing the clouds directly towards me, and that mountain top was just spreading them out to catch the light, and I couldn't resist it. Number 16, again from September. This is another shot from the same location as the last image at first light as it was coming up over Snowdon. As I mentioned with an earlier image, hopefully you'll see why this is one of my favourite locations around here. This wide open valley's got so many options and features of interest. If you ever visit, you'll be really surprised at how easily you can access all these various positions without too much difficulty and strenuous hiking. Number 17, late September, a weekend in the lakes with my good friends from the photography pubcast, and it simply had to get at least one slot on my favourite images from this year. We hiked up to the top of Holme Fell for sunrise, and it was quite decent. If you watch a video that I made, you might have seen that the Langdale pikes were beautifully illuminated at one point, but I picked this one because, as with my earlier Snowdon summit, I processed this image rather as an experiment because of the amount of mist in the valley. It wasn't a full temperature inversion, it was just some low cloud blowing through, but there wasn't a great deal of colour in the image to speak of, and it wasn't really doing much for the impact of the scene. So I felt that this treatment worked better, and it serves as a nice memory of a great morning out with good mates. Image number 18, we're almost done. Again, late September and from the same weekend of the last one. This was shot about 30 minutes after the sun had set, looking north up Coniston Water. I think this is the only one I've included that was a technical challenge. I really like the scene and I wanted to capture it. But as is often the case, what you can see looks nice, but doesn't really make for a particularly compelling image. The mist had started to come up over the water, so that was helpful, but it really needs something else to lift it, make it more engaging. So I decided to play about with long exposures, too short a shutter speed and the ripple on the lake was too obvious, but too long a shutter speed and there wasn't enough texture to make it interesting. I didn't want it to look like a sheet of ice. So a bit of mucking about, I settled on about a 30-second exposure, which retains those interesting swirls and texture in the water. And it also gave me some nice hints of reflection and emphasised the mist. I was really pleased that those two figures over on the left-hand side hung around long enough for me to capture their ghosts. I think they really add to the image. This was quite a challenge of processing. I dodged and burnt every tiny little clump of leaves in those trees to emphasise the texture and create that 3D relief because they look really flat in the raw file. And the layers in the background really worked to help emphasise the depth in the image. And overall, I was quite pleased with how it turned out, and it gives me a great memory of a very enjoyable evening there. Number 19, October. So we're getting to stuff you've probably seen quite recently. This one was very deliberate. I visited the location at a time when I knew exactly where the tide and the sun would be. And the conditions were perfect. The plenty of wind blowing the clouds through the sky. It was just after a storm. I think this is about 8 or 9 exposures with various bits of them brought together into the final composition, kind of like I did with that image from the last video. Now, one thing worth noting about this one, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see I've used f/22. And unsurprisingly, somebody wrote in when I shared this at the time and said, is that a typo? Well, no, the lens is capable of stopping down to that aperture, which gave me the shutter speed I was looking for. The ND filters that I had available were either giving me too short a shutter speed or 10 stop was going to be far too long. So I used the aperture. I'm more than happy with the quality of this image, despite the know-it-alls that preach about diffraction. Yes, of course, diffraction exists. The only question is whether or not I'm prepared to put up with it in order to achieve other aspects of the image which are more important to me. And the nature of this image is completely unbothered by diffraction, but it wouldn't work at all well at a different shutter speed. Lastly, number 20, December. I'm not going to labour this one too much. I featured it in a recent video, but I've included it because I really quite like it. I like it particularly when I can visualise an image in my mind and then get the camera out and create what I had in my mind. And this is a really good example of that sort of thing. And there you have it, my top 20 images for 2021. Well, hang on a minute, you may be saying. The video title says it's 21 images. Well, yes, that's absolutely true. What happened was, after I compiled my list, one of the images from my last video, I just couldn't leave out. And since I only showed it to you recently, I've just stuck it on again at the end. I've just got one last thing I'd like to say if you're still here. Thank you so much. I started a couple of weeks ago a new Facebook group called Micro Four Thirds Landscape Photography. I'll put a link to it in the description below if you're interested at all in coming along and joining. There are two key aspects to it. One is it isn't just about Micro Four Thirds, although that is mainly what it's about. It's about us chatting about the trials and tribulations of dealing with small sensor landscape photography. But also, the reason I've started this group is because whilst there are other Micro Four Thirds landscape photography groups, mine is slightly different in that I don't care if you come along and advertise your vlog, your website, your workshops, sell your secondhand gear. There are no rules. Well, actually, there is a rule. There's one simple rule: don't be an arse. That's it, really. I won't be adjudicating. If you turn out to be an arse, the other group members will tell you pretty much straight away. But anyway, what we will be doing, or I'll be doing in my locality, and hopefully other members will too wherever they live, is arranging meetups. And I'll be publishing dates for a couple of meetups, I think. during the course of this year, I'll get those onto the group in the next week or so once I've scratched my head over my calendar. So Micro Four Thirds Landscape Photography Facebook group. Actually, one last thing. You know that I normally put my images on Flickr so you can see them in high res. Well, I've stopped that. I started Flickr back last January. I could just do with less social media. It's just too much of a ball ache. So I've cancelled that. That account's closed, gone. And in future, I'm going to go back to what I always used to do, which is the images that I show on my videos will go onto the website so you can see them in full res and have a nose round, look at some other images, all that sort of thing. So that's all of my news for the end of 2021. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all of your support during the year and the years preceding that. I wish you all an absolutely fabulous 2022. Let's hope it's slightly better than last year. And thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have and you haven't done it yet, why not subscribe now and join me next time? Cheers.